In this video series, we're going to be talking, this particular video, we're going to be talking about the solar system, Earth's characteristics, and we're going to get involved in even the most minute things like atoms and protons and electrons and things like that. The idea behind this is to give you intelligent information so that you can make an intelligent response to people who ask you about your faith. This particular faith, part of the faith we're going to talk about is the evolution scientific part of it. So there are 25 different characteristics or parameters that you have to have life. And all scientists agree on that there are 25 characteristics. The first characteristic, I'm just going to read several of these, has to be with the gravitational force. You have to have a certain gravitational force. If you have it too weak or too small, too weak or too hard, too large, then of course, obviously, will be flattened to the ground, will be floating out in the space. So you have to have just the right gravitational force. And that means that the planets have to revolve around each other at a certain distance and a certain speed. And they also have to rotate at a certain time. And there has to be a strong nuclear force between like the protons and electrons, the neutrons in the atoms and the molecules. It has to be a certain force, what we call nuclear force between those. It just has to be just the right parameters. And as we're going to try to prove or to show you that God made these parameters just perfectly for us so that we could have life. A lot of other different parameters. As we orbit around the sun, they has to have certain parameters for the seasons. If we didn't have those, we couldn't have life on Earth as it is today because we wouldn't have any seasons. If we didn't have the tilt of the Earth's axis, if it was straight up instead of tilted, it would tend to burn people in some place and freeze people out in other places. And so we have to have that particular tilt, just enough tilt. We can't go a degree either way or we ruin everything. The speed that the Earth rotates around, not only revolves around the sun, but also rotates itself, is very, very important. It has to do with temperatures. The ratio of oxygen to nitrogen in the atmosphere has to be perfect. If it's any less or any more of one or the other, then we couldn't have life. So God has tailor-made this whole earth, and for that matter, the universe, just for man. And we're going to see that as we get into Genesis and talk about that a little bit. So the solar system has to have one star to have life. You can't have 2 or 3 stars because of the gravitational pulls and because of several other matters. And again, I'm taking a science course that's probably 12 weeks long and boiling it down into about a 30-minute video. So I can only have one star. Our particular solar system only has one star. You have to have the right age. If the solar system was any older, you'd have temperatures and things would fluctuate too much. You have to have the correct size. As a matter of fact, the size, I like this because on our planets, we have all of our planets, and I have them drawn here on a piece of paper for you. And these are all of our different planets. And you notice this is Jupiter, the big red one, and Earth is this little tiny dot right here. So the size between Earth and Jupiter, here's Jupiter and here's Earth, is so that Jupiter is outside of our solar system or in our solar system, but on the edge of our solar system. So any asteroids or any meteors coming towards Earth will bounce off of Jupiter first. And so Jupiter kind of protects us from a lot of the cosmic radiation that we have coming in. Again, it protects the Earth from like comets and things like that. So the scientists don't agree. A lot of scientists don't agree with the biblical story of creation and God creating the earth. And they said another fallacy we have is that Moses couldn't have figured out all this stuff and then wrote the first 5 books of the Old Testament. It couldn't have done that. Yeah. And so, but we know that God, through the Holy Spirit, inspired Moses to write all of these books of the Bible. And so it's a difference of, again, interpretation. We have to realize that science in itself, there's nothing wrong with science in itself, it's just science. It's the interpretation of the facts of science that we have a problem with. Sometimes scientists go out on their own and they take stuff that they don't like, and they just take all those facts and kind of bury them, and the things that they do like they put into their theories because they match their theories. There are two main laws of thermodynamics that the Earth has, and all scientists agree that these laws are true and are valid. The first one's called the law of thermodynamics, which means that we only have X amount of matter in our universe. You can't make any more, we can't destroy any more. We can destroy matter in the way that, let's say we burn up something. When we burn up something, we're not burning up matter, we're burning up, we're not disintegrating matter. What we're doing is if we burn it up, it turns into, the residue is heat and ash. So we still have that matter, it's just in different forms. So you can't completely obliterate matter. So the first law of thermodynamics says that there's only a certain amount of matter and you can't create matter. Well, right off, that blows in the face of the evolutionists who say that, first of all, there was nothing, and then all at once there was 2 nothings, and there was 4 nothings, and there were 8 nothings, and pretty soon these inanimate objects made a living being, and then it goes on from there. So the first law of thermodynamics says that you can't have that you have to, that there's only just X amount of matter to start off with. Now, we Christians think that God created everything by just his voice. He just said, okay, this is going to happen, and it happened. He created the sun, the moon, the stars, the animals, the insects, all those different kinds of things, because there wasn't any matter or anything at all, and he created it and said there will be. So that doesn't is not in conflict with the first law of thermodynamics. The second law of thermodynamics says that everything is dissipating, everything's decaying, and that life is not being created as such. New species are not being created, that everything is decaying. We can see this in the universe. Everything is decaying. If you put a piece of fruit on the kitchen counter for several days, you'll see that it starts to decay, or a pot of flowers. You'll see that a bouquet of flowers, you'll see that it starts to decay after a while too. So matter doesn't last forever. It goes into different forms. With the evolutionists, this is the second blow to their theories, because the evolutionists think that there are new species being created every day. So that means that there are new species, and that monkeys eventually can become humans. And so that kind of goes against their theory. The second law of thermodynamics says that no, that's not true, that there's nothing being created. We started out with about 800 species of different things, 8,000, and now we're down to about 4,000 species. There's no new species being made, but there obviously are species going extinct all the time, which falls right in line, parallels with the second law of thermodynamics says. But the evolutionists kind of walk around that. One of the evolutionary theories that I think is really cool is called quantum tunneling. And what they think that these little, I guess you'd call them particles, some kind of virtual particles, I guess you'd call them, virtual particles that appear and then they disappear real quick before humans have a chance to see them. So nobody's ever seen one, because that's the whole idea behind quantum tunneling, that these things appear and then they disappear real quick before humans have a chance to explore them. And that's how they think that the whole universe started, and all at once these things appeared real quick. Again, that's just a theory, and obviously we don't believe in that. So we want to talk about just some specific forces in our Earth, and how God made them, and how specific they are, and how intricate they are, and how characteristic they are for human life. If we didn't have these, we would be in trouble. Well, let's talk about light to begin with. Light, as we all learn in school, is Roy G. Biv. I was going to do that. Roy G. Biv. Okay, what Roy G. Biv is red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. These are the colors that we see in the rainbow, and these are the only colors that the human eye can see, Roy G. Biv. However, God has also produced many other light waves, if you would. And as these light waves, one of the theories that we have that all scientists agree on, as the light waves get longer and go away from you, they have a red kind of a hue. As light waves come towards you, they get shorter and they have kind of a blue hue. So we call this the light waves going away from us, we call that red shifting. And we call the light waves coming towards us, we call that blue shifting. So we have red shifting and blue shifting. The Hubble telescope has given us a lot of examples of they can measure things now by either red shift or blue shift, whether the thing is going away from us or coming towards us. They can measure the distances of planets away from each other or from us, and they can also measure the size of planets by basically it's sort of like sonar, bouncing something off and bringing it back. They can measure the light waves going out, the red shifting, and they can measure the light waves coming back, the blue shifting, and tell exactly how far away some planet is or how big it is, or some whatever it might be. So we use this, and so God in His infinite mercy has shown us all these, but there are also some other ways. If you go longer after red, you go to infrared, and then after infrared is microwave. And then we get into radio waves and things like that. So these are all just longer waves of light that we can't see. We can't see infrared, we can't see microwave, we can't see radio waves. They're just longer, again, the red shift of light after red. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, we have, and I think this is just marvelous that God created all these different things that we can use. We obviously use all these different things, microwaves and radio waves and communication and infrared to sense different things. Over here in the other spectrum, we have the shorter waves, and we have the first shorter wave after that is called ultraviolet. So here's violet, here's ultraviolet, and then we have X-ray, and then we have gamma rays. And there's a whole slew of shorter blue waves also, but the idea here is that God has given these things. We can't see these either, but we use ultraviolet, or we have ultraviolet glasses, UV glasses, to keep the ultraviolet from hurting us. And we have X-rays, use those in doctors trying to diagnose people. The gamma rays are what they use in surgery to do non-invasive surgery, that kind of thing. So God has created all this beautiful stuff just in light. So this whole thing is just about light. That's one of the forces we were going to talk about. Next one I'm going to talk about is water. And again, I'm taking a very, very large course, science course, and making it into very short, just to show you what God can do. Next thing is water. So you have to have water, and there are other planets that have water on them, but water in other planets, every place, is either in a solid or in a gas. It's never in a liquid form. Earth is the only place that water is in a solid, liquid, and a gaseous state. You can have all three of those. Very, very interesting concept, and God made that just for us. Another characteristic of most chemicals or most elements is that if you have a vat or a pool of let's just say nitrogen or sulfur, whatever you're going to have, some kind of liquid, argon, whatever it might be. When you go to freeze it, it freezes from the bottom up. Okay, this is the last place it freezes. With water, it does just the opposite. The water freezes from the top down. It's the only element that does that. And God made that because of that, because we needed water, and we needed the water in this particular form to make this work. So water always freezes from the top on down. And we'll talk about it a little bit later. So there's just one more little characteristics that God has made for us to show that, or to help us in living on earth, to be able to have life. Okay, so let's go to there are a couple forces. Scientists have agreed that there are forces, and the main forces they know of now are, let's see, strong forces and weak forces and electromagnetic forces and gravitational forces. These are the four forces. Now, scientists are having, creating all kinds of theories and things like that, and trying to discern all the different kinds of things, the strong forces, the weak forces, electromagnetic, and the gravitational. So they're trying to figure out all this stuff. And so science, one day, their whole goal is to have a theory of everything eventually. So they want to have all these forces into one thing and call it the theory of everything. And you'll see books written on the theory of everything, which means that they've figured out all this stuff. They know everything there is to know about all these things, and they can combine it into one theory and call it the theory of everything. You're going to see a lot of this coming down the pike. This is very scientific kind of stuff. And we can get into a whole, read several books on science, theory of everything, and it's a big science. Okay, so let's go back to Darwin and talk about him a second. In his book, he talked about there were 5 ultimate scientific ideas, and one was time, and one was matter, and one was force, and one was space, and one was, I've forgotten the last one, and one was action. So these were the 5 scientific ideas that Darwin came up with. And the scientists to this day still think that these are the main 5 scientific actions, or scientific, I guess we can call them actions, scientific ideas, ultimate scientific ideas. So if I read the first chapter of Genesis, the very first verse, these are the 5 different ideas. And notice that in the beginning, that would be time. I'm quoting Genesis 1:1. God, that's a force. Down here, we'll check these off. So in the beginning, that's time. There's a force, that's God. Created, that's action. The heavens, that's space. And the earth, that's matter. So God has figured all this stuff out ahead of time, and scientists are just now figuring this out. I think it's really cool when science follows the Bible and scientists finally figure out something that God's known all along. Okay, so let's go now to very, very small stuff. I love the small stuff. Don't fret the small stuff. Okay, we have a periodic table. Periodic table has all the elements. You've seen these before in your school thing. Good old periodic table. And there's all kinds of elements out there. There's argon and radium and uranium and sulfur, nitrogen, oxygen, all these different, not oxygen, all these different elements. And the elements are made up of atoms. Okay, and the atoms. And the atoms have a nucleus inside of them. And that nucleus has protons and neutrons. Now I'm going to get a little sciencey on you, and I apologize, but I just want to kind of show you how all this stuff goes together and how God has put all this stuff together for us. I think it's really cool. So we have atoms. And so if we have, let's say we have sulfur, which is an element, on our periodic table we just had. So sulfur is an element, and the sulfur is made up of a whole bunch of sulfur atoms, okay? So, in the nucleus we have these protons and neutrons and electrons and that kind of stuff bouncing around inside the nucleus of the atom. Okay, if we have a molecule then is more than one atom. So a molecule, for instance, H2O is a molecule. A molecule has two hydrogen atoms, and one oxygen element or atom, okay? So a molecule is where we're going with this. We want to talk about the molecules, and we want to talk about the atoms and the protons and neutrons. But let's go ahead with that. So first of all, we have the atom. A bunch of atoms of the same type are called an element, and then a molecule is a multiplication or a combining of the atoms together. Now, let's go with the molecule. So I have a molecule. So in the molecule, there is a thing called DNA. Put the molecule back at molecules. In the atoms, there are things called DNA. And DNA is basically a blueprint of everything that makes you, you. So for instance, if I have brown eyes and I have brown hair and I have a certain build and I have certain characteristics, those are all in my blueprint. The blueprint DNA has chromosomes in it. And the chromosomes have genes in them. Okay, now we're going to get into this just a little bit deeper, but just bear with me because the sciencey stuff will all make sense in a minute. So here we have molecules. We're made up, our bodies make a bunch of molecules. Those molecules have DNA in them. The DNA is a blueprint. It tells us where things go and how they're put together. The chromosomes and the genes are inside the DNA. They tell us specifically, for instance, we have 46 chromosomes in us. We get 23 from mom and 23 from dad. And that's where we start off with, 46 chromosomes. Okay? Okay, now let's get a little bit fancier. So one of the things that we have inside of us also are some of the molecules are called proteins. And the proteins are the thing that build and repair. Let's put proteins over here. Proteins are they build and repair our molecules. They're molecules, but they follow the blueprints of the DNA, and they create new cells and they get rid of the old cells and things like that. So our bodies are always replacing and creating new cells every day, thousands of new cells every day, and the proteins are what do that. Okay, and the DNA is what tells the proteins to do that. So another hot topic that's coming up is called RNA. Now, if I can see that, I'll show what RNA. RNA is really unique too, because RNA is the guy that tells the proteins what to do from this blueprint. So an RNA is basically like a little train station. He goes and he reads, RNA reads the blueprints from the DNA and says, oh yeah, this guy's supposed to have blue eyes. And he goes over here and tells the proteins, okay, make sure you make blue eyes the next time you're creating new cells and get rid of the old cells and stuff like that, and repairing the old cells. Make sure that you have blue eyes there because this guy's supposed to have blue eyes. So it's just as simple as that. But yet it's very, very complex. One of the things I love about this is that God has created all this kind of stuff. And after years and years of, especially in the 20th century and now in the 21st century, we figured all this stuff out. And it all matches exactly what God had in plan to begin with. And we're just now uncovering God's plan each day. And I think it's just so tremendous and so cool. Okay. So one of the things that the evolutionists get crazy about is they say, okay, well, when there are what we call mutations. And mutation basically is when the gene doesn't do exactly what it's supposed to do. For instance, I'll put mutations up here some places, get rid of a few things over here. Mutation. And they're saying that's how this apes to monkey or molecules to man thing is all about. They say it's all about the mutations. And so what happens is, in a mutation is when you get your 23 genes from your mom and 23 genes from your dad, something happens and you lose one or one gets corrupted and something like that happens. Well, that is true. That part of it is true in that you can have mutations. For instance, let's take a beetle. You've got a beetle and he's on a desert island, and this beetle flies around, and he flies around the different flowers and gets all of his, it could be a bumblebee, whatever, we'll just call it a beetle. And a beetle flies around and he does all his things and takes care of it, gets pollen from the flower and things like that. Well, let's say that because of the weather starts to change, and eventually it gets a lot windier on this island, and there's a lot more wind, and it starts knocking down the beetle, and the beetle can't fly anymore. So eventually his predecessors, or the predecessors, the people after him, his children and his baby beetles and the great baby beetles and the great baby beetles, they all stopped developing wings after a while, because now the beetle's just kind of stuck on just walking around and doing his thing on the flowers rather than trying to fly around the flowers. Doesn't need to anymore, because the wind out around the island is so bad that it's just the beetles that are survived are just on the flowers and they're fine. So now you've got a beetle that doesn't fly. He still does his beetle things, still has beetle families, everything's just the same, but he doesn't fly anymore. Well, what the evolutionists say is that, oh yeah, well maybe he could create wings and have more. Here's a beetle body with wings. That can't be, because you're creating something, you're creating a species, and the first and second laws of thermodynamics say you can't create anything. All this stuff is going to decomposition. So basically, if he had wings at one time, the future bugs won't have wings, and so therefore that's a mutation. So the next bugs coming down won't have any wings, but they'll still be beetles. They'll still be fine. They won't be jackrabbits, or they won't be coyotes or something like that. They'll still be beetles. Okay, so that's the whole concept behind mutations. And this is, again, macroevolution versus microevolution. Microevolution is what this is. This is mutations. That happens all the time. If you keep breeding dogs, eventually you'll get some little tiny dog like a Chihuahua or something really small like that. Well, you can't breed a Chihuahua with a German Shepherd and expect to get a St. Bernard. It's not going to happen, because some of those characteristics that were for bigger dogs aren't in the Chihuahuas anymore. There's no way they're going to make a bigger dog out of a Chihuahua. It's always going to be a smaller dog, because the genes have been mutated down, and as we have forcibly tried to make those smaller dogs, teacup dogs for instance, they're never going to be the big dogs again that you had before. You're going to take two big dogs to make another big dog. So the idea behind that is mutation. This is called microevolution. This happens all the time, no problem. The problem that happens is macroevolution. Macroevolution says that this will indeed turn into, this bug will start sprouting wings again, or maybe some lizard will sprout wings and eventually become a bird, or a dinosaur will eventually go into the water and become a fish. Those things just cannot happen for lots of reasons that I've shown you here, but mostly because of macroevolution, it cannot happen. Microevolution happens all the time. That's mutations, but not macroevolution. So I wanted to bring that to your attention to show you that. So the idea behind this is now that we've seen that God has made all this beautiful creation, and we're just now stumbling out to make just a little bit of this, and we're just finding out about this stuff, and it's really cool. The way we can see science eventually discover all the stuff that God's actually made to begin with. So in our next video, we're going to be talking about the Genesis account, specifically the age of the earth, the flood, the ice age, dinosaurs, and the Big Bang Theory. Thanks.